On Tuesday, Australia's Parliament sat for the first time since the May election with the new Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Prime Minister Albanese is determined to have a greenhouse gas reduction target enshrined in law. Tackling the climate crisis has been high on the Australian Prime Minister's agenda. In fact, after 3 years of record-breaking and recurring bushfires and floods, it was also a key concern for voters in the 2022 Australian federal elections. Prime Minister Albanese has repeatedly stressed the importance of action against climate change. He will introduce legislation on emission targets for 2030 and 2050 in the first sitting of the new House of Representatives on Wednesday. The bill, known as the Climate Change Bill 2022, has 4 elements. The law would require Australia to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to a level that is 43% below what it was in 2005. This will need to be achieved by the year 2030. The bill also calls for Australia to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, which is the first element of the bill. The second tasks the Independent Climate Change Authority to provide advice on Australia's progress against those very targets. And the third element requires the Minister for Climate Change, currently Chris Bowen, to report annually to Parliament on the progress made in meeting these very targets. The final element of the bill is that it will embed the nation's targets in the objectives of key government agencies such as infrastructure, Australia and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, among others. Listen in.
We have our mandate, which is very clear. Our mandate is for 43% by 2030. We've said, of course, the nature of these targets are that it's a floor, not a ceiling. But we actually need to have a plan to get change. You can't just come up with a figure or come up with a sort of thought bubble. Our policy is well thought through. It was announced. It was campaigned upon. Indeed, it received a mandate.
Although Prime Minister Albanese's centre-left Labour Party holds a narrow majority in the House, it will need the support of senators from outside government ranks to get the bill through the upper chamber if the Labour Party is successful in persuading all 12 senators from the minor Greens party to support the bill. It will only need one more senator from the remaining 6 available to gain a majority, while Prime Minister Albanese has said that voters and business groups had endorsed the 43% target. The Greens have more ambitious climate targets in mind. They want Australia to slash emissions by 75% by 2030. The Greens leader, Adam Band, has said that his party needed more concessions and that negotiations would continue.
On the climate legislation, as we've been making clear for some time, we have been very concerned that Labor's 43% target is not compliant with the Paris Agreement. It's not a science-based target. It's based on Australia and the world exceeding 2 degrees of warming. We've been very concerned that the bill may put that weak target into law in a way that would put a handbrake on future governments that might be willing to act according to the science.
The new government wants a 43% target enshrined in law in case a future administration attempts to reduce the target. 6 new Greens lawmakers were sworn in on Tuesday. The major parties both lost seats to candidates who promised more action on climate change.
Be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
And for more details, we are now being joined by Rob Fowler. Rob has been working on the global climate challenge since 2002. He has been part of Australia's turbulent journey to address climate change across government, business and investors. He joins us now from Melbourne. Rob, thanks so much for joining us on WION.
Good evening. Good evening. Great to be with you.
So my first question, from record-breaking, recurring bushfires to floods, Australia has seen firsthand the effects and consequences of climate change. Will this climate bill make any difference on ground?
Over time, we need to change the way we're doing things, and this is a great starting point. This has been a warning, been sent out for a long, long time now. Australia is seeing the impacts of climate change, as we're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere as well, with record heat. So the world is coming to grips with this challenge of climate change. Australia has an opportunity to make a new direction, and I think the new government seems to be taking that very seriously. We do expect that there will be major changes in Australia's situation based on the new government's policies. One part is to increase the transmission of renewable energy into the places it's needed. We see are changing in terms of how industrial companies will need to reduce their emissions over time.
Absolutely.
That's an important part of Australia's environment.
Absolutely, Rob. A lot of the focus seems to be on bolstering transparency when it comes to the government's response, specifically to the advice given by the Climate Authority. Tell us more about that and the controversy that may ensue.
The new government is setting a target for 2030 at 43% reductions, but they know that that target has to increase over time. There has to be a ratcheting effect, which the Paris Agreement locks in to a lot of international arrangements, including Australia's arrangements. So that 43% target must increase. How much that increases by is something that the government is trying to remove from politics. That's a very big step. The Climate Change Authority was set up a long time ago to try and provide that independent, science-based approach to this conundrum, this challenge. How fast should Australia remove fossil fuels from its economy? That challenge is, I think, being handed over to an authority which is independent of government, hopefully independent of politics. But of course, that authority needs to be refreshed, rejuvenated and resourced appropriately so that it can do the job ahead of it.
Right, Rob. Thank you so much for all those inputs and thanks for joining us on WION World is One, specifically on our climate tracker.
Thank you. My pleasure.
WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.